The NBA draft is super hard to predict, and with that has come a ton of decisions that are really tough to look back at for certain fan bases. In this video, I want to take a look at the worst draft decision made by every team in the past 5 years. If you guys like the content, smash the like button, smash the subscribe button, and let's get into this. Now, for obvious reasons, we're not going to be including the most recent 2022 draft, as we only have the Summer League to go on. We're going to start by going back to 2017, where 7 teams made their worst decision in the last 5 years. Now, I think the most obvious one out of this draft is the Philadelphia 76ers. Not only did they draft one of the biggest busts in league history, Markelle Fultz, with the #1 overall selection in the draft, they traded up from number 3, where none other than Jason Tatum was drafted, and gave up a future first rounder in the process. The next team might get some people going, and that's the Los Angeles Lakers deciding to grab Lonzo Ball. Considering what the Lakers got out of him and the fact that Jason Tatum was on the board, out of the options available, I think it was their worst decision. Now, I'd probably still end up going to New Orleans in the Anthony Davis trade, but I think he would have represented a lot more value in that deal. Then we've got the Denver Nuggets, which if you saw my last video, you know where I'm going with this. The Nuggets selected Donovan Mitchell with the 13th overall pick in the draft, then traded him to the Utah Jazz for Trey Lyles and Tyler Lydon. Regardless if the selection was made on behalf of the Jazz, considering he was on the board and how the rest of Lyles and Lydon's career turned out, this one has to hurt for Nuggets fans. The Blazers had a couple I was deciding between, but I ultimately went with their 2017 decision to trade the 15th and 20th overall picks in the draft for number 10, where they decided to get Zach Collins. Not only has Zach Collins put together a pretty disappointing career so far, the next players to come off the board were Malik Monk, Luke Kennard, Donovan Mitchell, and Bam Adebayo. The Milwaukee Bucks are up next. Now, we don't have a lot of options for them just due to their lack of first round picks in the last 5 years, so I decided to go with them grabbing DJ Wilson out of Michigan, who averaged 4 points so far in his NBA career, and we would see John Collins, Jared Allen, and OG Anunoby come off the board shortly after. Right after the Bucks selection, we had the Indiana Pacers deciding to grab UCLA power forward TJ Leaf, a super questionable prospect looking back, as he was just a glorified stretch big that really had a lot of his offensive production propped up by what was just a really good UCLA offense. He's currently out of the league and again, drafted right ahead of Jared Allen, John Collins, and OG. Just after the Pacers, we saw the Oklahoma City Thunder make their worst selection of the last 5 years, deciding to grab Terrence Ferguson with the 21st pick. Now, the Thunder definitely had some other players in contention, Darius Bazley, Pokusevski, but considering we already have a really good idea of what the future holds for Ferguson as he's out of the league and he was drafted in close proximity to the guys we mentioned when it came to DJ Wilson and TJ Leaf, I'm going to go with him for now. Then we go to 2018, and I think you have a pretty good idea of a couple of the teams here. Starting it off, we've got the team that held the #1 overall pick in the draft, the Phoenix Suns. Now, I know this one's going to get a ton of reactions in the comments as they ended up walking away with a great player in DeAndre Ayton. They also had a pretty terrible selection in 2017, that being Josh Jackson. But anytime you pass on a player that was as good a prospect as Luka Doncic, when you pass on a player that becomes a top 5 player by the end of his rookie contract, I think you've got to be on this list. For the same reason, we've got the team that held the 2nd overall pick in the draft, that being the Sacramento Kings. Now, there's quite the difference between the Kings and the Suns. As well, the Kings walked away with Marvin Bagley. Next up, we've got the New York Knicks, and as expected, they've got a lot to decide between, but it really came down to Frank Ntilikina or Kevin Knox. Considering that Mikal Bridges and SGA would be the very next selections after Knox, I'm going to go with him. But speaking of SGA, the Hornets are up next, deciding to trade the 11th overall pick in the draft, that being SGA, in favor of a package headlined by the very next selection, Miles Bridges. Miles Bridges is out of the league. It has nothing to do with basketball, but he's out of the league nonetheless, and SGA is one of the most promising young guards in the entire league. A LaMelo SGA backcourt sounds extremely exciting. Then we've got the Clippers, which is weird to say considering they walked out of this draft with Gilgeous-Alexander, but we don't have many options, so I'm going with their other first round selection, Boston College 2 guard Jerome Robinson, who's currently without a contract. Now we jump to 2019, where we actually have the most teams, and we're going to kick it off with the 6th overall pick in the draft to the Minnesota Timberwolves, Jarrett Culver. Now, they actually traded up in this draft, sending the 11th overall pick Cam Johnson and Dario Saric to the Suns. Not a crazy package, but this is still their worst decision, considering he lasted just 2 seasons with the team and is now averaging just 3 points a game. The next team we have is the New Orleans Pelicans. Now, as you probably remember, they held the #1 overall pick in the draft, but this has nothing to do with that. It has nothing to do with Zion Williamson. It was their other big draft night decision, deciding to trade down from the 4th overall pick in favor of the 8th and 17th selections. they decided to use those on Jackson Hayes and Nickeil Alexander-Walker, both decent players, but it's clear right now the right decision was to stay put and select either DeAndre Hunter or Darius Garland. Then we've got the Chicago Bulls selecting Coby White with the 7th overall pick. Now the Bulls were tough, as it just really came down to who was the worst selection out of Markkanen, Wendell Carter, and Coby White, and as of now, I guess I'm going White. The Hawks were another tough one, but ultimately, I went with their decision to take Cam Reddish with the 10th overall selection, just ahead of guys like Cam Johnson and Tyler Hero. I loved the risk to reward selection at the time for the Hawks. Reddish flashed a lot of potential. Sadly, it just hasn't worked out. The Celtics really came down to Aaron Naismith or Romeo Langford. Langford's averaged just 3 points so far in his career, and seeing how much value was attributed to Naismith in the recent trade for Malcolm Brogdon, I'm definitely going with Langford. The San Antonio Spurs didn't have a lot of options, so I ended up going with Luka Samanic, who they took 19th overall and was drafted directly ahead of Matisse Thybulle, Brandon Clark, and Grant Williams. Lastly, for 2019, we've got the Cavaliers and Nets. Now for the Cavaliers, I think there's a couple guys that could be in the mix in the near future, but for now, they're here. The Nets, they don't really have many options at all, so I think this is definitely the right spot. Now, what did these teams do exactly? Well, the Cavaliers ended up drafting Dylan Windler, and the Nets, while they ended up trading him later, drafted Mfiondu Kabengele directly ahead of Jordan Poole, a player that if we redrafted tomorrow is most likely a top 5 selection in the draft. Predicting this at the time would have been legitimately impossible, but that's just how the draft is sometimes. Now we go to 2020, and there's a pretty clear one at the top. That's the Golden State Warriors deciding to grab James Wiseman with the 2nd overall pick in the draft. Now, Wiseman might turn into a solid player, but there's no question this was their worst decision of the last 5 years, considering LaMelo Ball was taken with the very next selection. Just imagine LaMelo Ball with the Warriors, not just in terms of what he could bring on the court, but just him as an asset in what's already a loaded group. Really scary to think about. Then we've got the Pistons taking Killian Hayes with the 7th overall pick. He was a really interesting foreign prospect coming into this draft, but so far, he's been nothing short of a bust, averaging less than 7 points on impressively bad efficiency. For the Washington Wizards, it comes down to Deni or Hachimura. For now, I'm going to go with Deni, as Halliburton would come off the board soon after, who really might be the perfect backcourt pairing to a player like Bradley Beal. Then we've got the Dallas Mavericks and Miami Heat, due to a lack of options, deciding to grab Josh Green and Precious Achiuwa just ahead of Tyrese Maxey, who was grabbed by the 76ers with the 21st pick and truly looks like an emerging star in this league. The Utah Jazz have been one of the least active teams in the draft since trading for Donovan Mitchell in 2017, so I have them going with Azubuike just ahead of Jaden McDaniels and Desmond Bane. Similarly, we've got the Toronto Raptors, again, a team we've barely seen in the draft recently, getting Malachi Flynn with the 2nd to last selection of the 1st round, just 1 spot ahead of Desmond Bane. Now we're only left with one team. We're only left with one draft, that being last year's 2021 draft. I'm sure more mistakes will emerge as time goes on from this year, but based on everything we know right now, the only one we have is the Magic deciding to take Jalen Suggs with the 5th overall pick. It seemed like great value at the time, but now coming off a season where he shot just 36% from the field and being drafted just ahead of Josh Giddey, Jonathan Kuminga, and Franz Wagner, who luckily they still ended up getting, it's not looking like a great decision looking back, but hopefully that changes over the next couple seasons. Now, if it wasn't already extremely clear, hindsight is 2020, but nonetheless, this was fun to look at. If you guys like the content, smash the like button, smash the subscribe button, and I'll catch you guys next time. Peace.